Hi there, and welcome to the Educators Corner podcast, the show that brings you conversations with educators from all over the world. Conversations where we stay curious for a little bit longer about the issues, challenges, and opportunities which we are facing in our schools and in our communities. Today we have the privilege of speaking with Lord Jim Knight, a prominent figure in education and technology. Lord Knight has an illustrious career spanning politics, education reform and digital innovation. As a government minister, he served as Minister of State for Schools and was a member of Gordon Brown's cabinet, where he played a key role in shaping education policy. Lord Jim Knight was created a life peer in 2010. Currently, Lord Knight has a number of roles, including chair of the Board of Trustees for EACT, a multi-academy trust of 38 academies across England. He is also chair of Century Tech, chair of STEM Learning, and he's a member of the Qualifications Advisory Board and also chair of COBIS. So you might call Lord Knight a full-time non-executive chair. Welcome to the show, Jim, and thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. I think you're joining us from London today, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in my glamorous House of Lords office in the heart of London, where it's a miserable old day with summer definitely having given way to autumn.
And it's still very hot and not actually quite so humid in Muscat today in Oman. How's your week shaping up, Jim?
The week has been busy and pretty intense. As you know, I like to disappear in August and recharge my batteries. So you pay the price when you come back with an overloaded inbox and then an overloaded diary. So, and the inbound traffic has been faster than I can cope with it. But what's been particularly busy and has thrown the week slightly has been the announcement first by the government on Monday that it was ending single word judgments for Ofsted inspections in schools. And then on Tuesday, Ofsted then published the outcome of their big listen and the review by Christine Gilbert of what Ofsted's up to. And because I had chaired an independent inquiry into the future of school inspections called Beyond Ofsted, I ended up on Jeremy Vine's show on Monday, and I've ended the week by keynoting a conference on the future of school inspections today. So there's been that noise going on whilst trying to get the jobs done that you listed off as part of my life here.
And now you're on the Educators Corner podcast, and we will come to that announcement about Ofsted earlier this week in the UK, because I think that's of particular interest to our listeners. We will come to that very shortly. You are a Lord and a Knight, so for our listeners around the world, maybe you could explain how is that possible?
Well, it's at one level straightforward, although I never thought that I would become a lord. So I was born a knight. It is my surname. Nothing grander than that. So yeah, yours is Vasher, mine is Knight. Fine. And then after the 2010 election, I lost my seat. Electoral gravity caught up with me in Dorset as a Labour MP. And Gordon offered to put me into the Lords, and I was unemployed at the time, and someone offers you a job for life when you're unemployed. It feels like a good deal. And so I said yes. And then I am now James Philip, the Right Honourable Baron Knight of Weymouth. And being a Baron Knight amuses people of a certain age. But that's why I am both a Lord and a Knight.
Fascinating, and it sounds like you should be living in a very big castle somewhere with a moat around it.
Unlike the terraced Edwardian house that I live in Lewisham, I am lucky. I also do. My wife has a property up in the Orkney Islands, which is where I spend August, and it's just a sort of perfect oasis of calm for us, looking out across the Atlantic towards Canada.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit in your career. You were an elected MP for 9 years, from 2001 to 2010. You served as Minister of State for Schools, I think at the time you were the longest serving Minister of State for Schools. Is that right?
I was the longest serving of the Blair Brown years, for sure.
Okay.
But my 3 years was then totally eclipsed by Nick Gibbs' 12 or whatever it was that he then served for the coalition and the Conservative governments that followed.
Okay. So you were, and you obviously as a Lord, you're still involved in politics. So how did you become a politician? What was it that sparked between you and politics?
Well, when I was at university at Cambridge, my love then was theatre. I was in probably 20 different productions in my 3 years at Cambridge, 3 consecutive years at the Edinburgh Fringe. In my final year, I formed a theatre company with Sam Mendes. Most of the work that we did was new writing, commenting on what was going on in the world. And then I relatively quickly started a family at the age of 23 and needed to earn some proper money. So I then started managing theatres. But I sort of fell out of love with it, partly with a realization I wasn't that good at managing theatres, and partly I kind of realized that however frustrated I was with the Thatcher government at the time and some of the decisions that it was making, I wasn't really going to change anything with the arts. There was some fantastic social commentary in the arts. There's the time of David Hare and Spitting Image and Harry Enfield, lots of people commenting on what was going on in the world. Didn't change anyone's vote. So I decided to get more directly involved. So I packed in the arts because the people I were working for, my governing body, effectively, were all Tory councillors. So it was, it didn't make any sense to stand against them for office whilst they were still my employers. So I packed that in. I got a job with my next door neighbour selling telephone directory advertising, which was supposed to be temporary. It lasted for 10 years. Whilst I then became a councillor, mayor of Frome in Somerset, stood in the 97 election, lost by 77 votes. I was the closest loser in Britain, that historic election. And then carried on having a go in Dorset, where no one had ever won a Labour seat in a general election in history, and was the first in 2001. And that's kind of how it all happened.
Wow, so that's another political achievement, quite an accolade there. So you now sometimes describe yourself as a recovering politician. What do you mean by that, Jim?
I suppose what it means is, here in the House of Lords, we are not in the theatre of politics. We're in the deliberative business of improving law as it's being made. So I describe myself as a legislator and a recovering politician. I'm not that involved in the day-to-day cut and thrust of politics. I occasionally, you set out some of the other things that I do in education and technology. And that's what I spend most of my time thinking about and waking up in the morning worrying about. And then things occasionally happen that just suck me back in. So I got a bit more involved in the last general election campaign. I'm somewhat obsessed by the US presidential election at the moment. And you kind of realize unfortunately, a bit like an addict, that you'll never quite get over politics if you've been very active in the front line of politics. So it never quite leaves you, however much you think it has left you.
What is it that is so hard to leave? Is it the drama? Is it the opportunity to make a difference? Is it something else?
Well, it's a bit of both, actually. You don't get to the top of politics without a bit of an ego. And so probably a bit like getting to the top of international schools, you've got to have a bit of an ego to deal with all of the rocks that are thrown at you periodically. And your ego sort of says, oh, God, if only I was doing that, if we could do it better, and why are they doing this? They should be doing that. And that's all about looking at the individuals and judging them from afar without really knowing the detail of what they're doing. And I don't rule out, because in the Lords I could still be a government minister. I don't rule out that there might be a point in the future where there's something that I really want to change, and the only way to change it is as a government minister. but I can do quite a lot from where I am. I'm responsible for £200 million of public money in the Multi Academy Trust, with educating over 20,000 young people. I'm responsible for representing all of the British international schools around the world with COBIS, who are doing amazing work in changing the lives of young people and their destiny. There's a lot there that I can do that I really care about without having to give up my private life, work, all the hours that God sends with a huge intensity of scrutiny. That is the job of being a government minister.
You've started, I think, to let us into maybe part of the answer to this next question. How would you describe your purpose now? I mean, I listed only some of the things that you contribute to at the moment, and you've mentioned some of them again there now. So I'd say there's at least 10, 15 organisations or causes that you're supporting at the moment in some way or the other. What is your purpose?
I think the purpose is about trying to improve the life chances of children. And I'm fairly, I'm not a trained teacher. So in the end, that wasn't what happened as a way of achieving that. But through policy, I've been able to do a certain amount, and some things that I was proud of in my time as a minister. But now, the opportunity to ensure that schools are well run, that they're delivering a high quality, and that helping evolve the thinking about what schools are for as life evolves, as humanity, as society evolves, so that we can keep refreshing what schools are to change people's lives. And obviously I am particularly interested in those who have a particular struggle, those from the most disadvantaged parts of my country, those with SEND, those that who haven't been dealt a great set of cards at the off, and there's a bit more that we need to do to think about how to engage them. But equally, the international school work, which tends to be less of those young people, but this is the group of people who are going to lead the world. And so there's a responsibility to try and allow them to make the most of their education so that we can have a better world for every child.
I mean, I've been out of the UK in terms of education for nearly 14 years now. And if you're on the outside of certainly English system looking in, if I speak to my colleagues who are still in school, who are leading schools, who are teaching in schools, and you start to ask them about, how's it going then? How's it going in Sussex? How's it going in Yorkshire? How's it going in Manchester? Within 30 seconds, they're probably talking about Ofsted, and they're talking about Ofsted grades. And I mean, it seems that every school's mission is to become outstanding. And it seems from afar that the purpose of education could be actually Ofsted. And it does seem to be that Ofsted, say the last 10, maybe 15 years, there's this sort of impression that Ofsted is at the heart, not only of education in England, but also a lot of people within the system and outside the education system would hold Ofsted at least partly responsible for some of the most significant issues in the English education system. I mean, teacher leadership, recruitment, morale, well-being, just to name a few. Yeah. So this is really what we want to get into now, Jim, is to talk about this Beyond Ofsted review. And then you published the report in November 2023. And then, again, you've been talking about it sort of 10 months later, just this week. That report, and maybe we could just sort of jump straight to the conclusion. What was your overarching conclusion from doing that piece of work, which sounds like an absolutely fantastic piece of work for the Education Service?
Thank you. Yeah, and look, your description is broadly right, that we've got schools that culturally now are too often led around achieving certain Ofsted outcomes and forgetting that actually it's about an inclusive education that makes a difference for every child rather than makes a difference for every Ofsted inspector. And I don't put the blame wholly at Ofsted's door. They've had the amount of resource reduced alongside the amount of responsibility being increased. So we've seen less well-resourced inspection teams spending less time, coming up therefore with much more fragile judgments. And then the department, the government of whatever colour, has then increasingly said, well, we're giving you all this autonomy of schools, so therefore we're going to increase the amount of accountability, and our trigger for intervention is going to be the Ofsted judgment. And it's been the single word judgment which has created so much pain within the system. With in the case of Ruth Perry, the teacher who took her own life, she had an inadequate judgment triggered by a safeguarding finding, having been an outstanding school, and her whole career effectively was then written off in that one word, and that did change the debate. So to then answer your question, sorry, I am a recovering politician, so I always end up having to say what I want to say before I answer the question. But to answer your question, what we said was, we think that we need to get rid of the single word judgment, and if nothing else, as has now been announced this week, have the 4 descriptors of the 4 categories of leadership and governance, of the quality of education, of personal development, and I've forgotten what the 4th one is off the top of my head. But anyway, so you get the 4 descriptors rather than the 1. That's really helpful because it creates a more nuanced conversation. But annualized safeguarding checks, rather than, you've got some previously outstanding schools who are still waiting for an inspection 14 years later, and no one's been in to check that their safeguarding is right. That's wrong. You need that as a sort of annualized compliance check. And then I was really worried that we would end up answering an inspection problem with loads more inspection. So if you've got annualized safeguarding and you carry on with the current cadence of inspection in schools, that creates a problem. We now have a system in England where we've got a lot more groups, multi-academy trusts. They need to be inspected. So safeguarding, MAT level, and current school inspection, that's too much. So we most controversially recommended ending routine school level inspections and replacing those with group level inspections. So you inspect the governance and the quality and the capacity for school improvement within the group, and the sort of self-evaluation that informs all of that, rather than going into each individual school. You might want to sample some of the schools. I think probably you might want, on a risk-based approach, you might want, if inspectors have been into a MAT, if there's been safeguarding compliance visit, if they're then looking at the school report card data, which we've also advocated, then you might say, well, there's something here that we need to go in and have a look. And then they might go into an individual school and have a look. And, if they then want to make a judgment, they can make a judgment. So that was broadly the package that we recommended. And we've got a good way of the way there in terms of what's now been announced by the new government and by Ofsted in terms of the changes that we heard about this week.
Right, well, that's really what I wanted to ask you about next. Now we've had this announcement this week about single word judgments going. Presentationally, obviously that's had a big impact. You've been on news shows all week talking about this, in big demand, people wanting to discuss it. I guess one of my questions would be, is this the beginning of the end for Ofsted as we know it? Or is it simply something fairly presentational and it's actually not going to make a lot of difference?
I think it does make a difference, just as it stands. But I hope it's the end of the culture of fear that the interplay between accountability and inspection has created. So in that respect, it needs to be the end of Ofsted as we know it. and it needs to be moving into the sort of sunny uplands of a supportive environment of inspection, of schools looking forward to an inspection because it holds a mirror up to their practice and allows them to understand where they can still improve. Because, the vast majority of people I know who run schools are impatient to do better than they're doing at the moment because everyone knows that it's not perfect. And that's, possibly to anticipate one of your other questions, that's what inspired me about the international school world, is when I look at the quality assurance of the various accreditation schemes that are there from COBIS, from BSO, from others, I think that's broadly what that does, with particularly where you've got some peer some fellow heads, some fellow leaders in the accreditation teams. They're learning, they're getting professional development out of being in those visits because they learn the good stuff of what you're doing in schools. And then at the same time, they've got their experience to draw on and they've got the criteria that they're using for the quality assurance to give feedback to the school. And that becomes something a bit more like the self-improving system that everyone wants to see. And so I was inspired by that. I want to see more of that here in England. I love the aspect of the announcement that they've got, that there's now going to be support offered to schools in where they've got areas where there are weaknesses being identified by Ofsted. I hope that support comes in the form of fellow heads, fellow leaders, rather than expensive consultants being drafted in, or government inspectors, or worse still, government employees, civil servants telling head teachers what to do. But I think there's something exciting about moving from a culture of fear to a culture of support.
I would absolutely agree, and I'd say that's probably, perhaps that's the biggest difference. Which you've looked at a number of international systems. I know you looked at Singapore, Canada. You looked all over the world at different inspection systems and see what England could learn from that. And having been in the international sector for over a decade, we've had inspections. We had 4 inspections in the last 10 years here. We've used both BSO for my school here in Muscat and COBIS accreditation for the school down in Salalah. And absolutely, what characterises those accreditation processes is support. And then because they're supportive, you build trust between yourself and the team that is accrediting you or inspecting you. And it's supportive, it's done in an environment of trust. And the absolute focus is on how can we use this process to improve the school. And we reflect on what we've done through what we call our SEF, our school evaluation form, and I think you're suggesting something very similar with the the school performance record. So you reflect back on the performance of the school over the last year or the last 2 or 3 years, and then you look at where you are. You have external eyes who give that validation, and then you look forward to the areas of improvement. And that process has been fundamental, in my experience, in helping us shape the development journey of both British School Muscat and British School Salalah over the 13, 14 years I've been here. And so it does seem, and I'm really pleased that you did look around the world, and it doesn't have to be like it has been in England for the last 10 or 15 years. No. There are models out there which are much more supportive and do focus on improvement. So it is possible, and the international sector is booming.
And Kai, it's a sort of oddity that we have in this country, because after I finished doing the work on the report and we published it, I then, one of the reflections was Ofsted in schools isn't the only inspectorate in England that uses single word judgments. We have the same with the Care Quality Commission. We have the same with the prisons inspectorate, with the police inspectorate. And then we worry why we have a retention problem with our public service. It's because these blunt tools of single word judgments of what we do across the public sector create cultures of fear. It means managers believe that if they get the wrong word at the end of that inspection, their career's over, their job's on the line, and then they drive centrally this fearful culture that then puts people off and sends them off to go and do something else.
And I guess the argument for those single word judgments is that it's really transparent or easy for the consumer, in the case of schools, the parents, to find out about schools. But I think that it's really important that parents have really good information about the school. But like you say, if it means that in the case of the English education system, more than 40,000 teachers then are leaving the education system every year, and a lot of those are citing the accountability system, that's actually not helping create good schools.
No, it's not helping anybody. And then the additional thing that we can now do, which we had a system called Raise Online, which wasn't perfect, which collected data about what was going on, in a consistent way across schools. That's been allowed to wither away. We need to return to a consistent set of data collection about performance and about outcome. Measure some things that currently aren't being measured, maybe draw some inferences from some things based on what we know about schools, and possibly use some artificial intelligence as part of that, and then produce school report cards that are easy for parents to be able to understand what's going on, get closer to the idea that, as a parent, I want to know how my child is doing, how the school is serving my child, whether if my child went to a different school, my child would be better than it is at this school, so that I can ask the right questions of the school, ask the right questions of the governance, of the leaders, and so on. We can get much closer to that if we move to a more consistent and intelligent use of data, and that's part of the story too. Absolutely, and then we could talk a lot more about that.
But I think what's really heartwarming, Jim, is that if anybody's at the heart of this debate and has been at the heart of this debate for the last couple of years or so, you're absolutely at the heart of the debate, and it's wonderful to hear that you're optimistic that this is well, first of all, this is a significant change, this move away from the single word judgment, but you also think this could be the start of a reformed inspection program in England, because my goodness, do we need that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And look, I'll keep plugging away at it. I won't get everything that I want, but I hope to get, we've already got a fair way down the road this week. So, fingers crossed we'll go further still.
That's not the only issue, is it? That if you were speaking to teachers or school leaders, or if you were speaking to students, or if you were speaking to employers, Ofsted wouldn't be the only problem they'd talk to you about. Curriculum and assessment also seems to be a significant issue. As chair of COBIS, you wrote to the Secretary of State this time last year a letter on behalf of the COBIS membership, following the annual conference in May 2023. We're now also hearing that there's going to be a review of the curriculum. Professor Becky Francis has been tasked with that review. What change would you particularly like to see, and what's the equivalent of the single word judgment in the Ofsted reform that you've achieved? What's the one thing you'd really like to see change with our curriculum?
One is quite a difficult number, but I definitely want us to strip out quite a lot of the content. There's a report published this week by OCR, one of the exam boards, which was chaired by Charles Clarke, former Secretary of State. And I think they said that only 15% of history teachers in England managed to cover the whole of the curriculum for GCSE. 15. It's ridiculous. And there are some subjects, English, if you look at the set text, they're also ridiculous. They're sort of backward facing. There's a sort of belief that you get, all of the wisdom of the world as long as you read Of Mice and Men. And it's not current, and it doesn't speak to the diversity of people that subject should serve. And I think there's some ways of simplifying some of the prescription too around SPAG. A lot of parents during COVID had to wake up to what a fronted adverbial was, and worry that they never knew what that was in their whole life, and had hampered their own career development in not knowing what a fronted adverbial was. There's a lot of nonsense prescription in there, and when I've taken evidence from the Institute of Physics as another example, what they said was there's so much detail in the curriculum that they don't have the space to teach the big ideas of science. And that's what would be exciting. You know, the Secretary of State has said that, Bridget Phillipson, she said that she wants to reset the relationship with the profession. So that means not only doing the changes we talked about around accountability, but it means trusting professionals with a lighter curriculum where they can then, understand that the end game are the summative exams that are then taken, the public exams, the GCSEs, the IGCSEs, the A levels, the International Baccalaureate, whatever the choice is for the establishment. But they can then use their own professional judgment about pedagogy and curriculum, and I think that would transform the morale of the profession, and I think it would make it easier for them to deliver on the almost impossible job of looking at a class of 30 in front of them and working out how to excite each one of those, who are all individual and all different, about aspects of their subject and get them to really want to explore the learning in their subject rather than just game a bunch of tests, which, if you've got too much content, that's in the end what happens. And finally, that quantum of content also means that if you've got attendance problems, as we have in an endemic way in England at the moment, and we're not alone in that, once you've fallen behind, you're always going to stay behind, because there just isn't time to catch you up for a teacher, because you've just got to keep going to get through all of this bloody content that's prescribed in the curriculum.
Yeah, so a good education system, to sort of paraphrase Matthew Arnold slightly from the 19th century, but a good education system is characterized as much as by what it doesn't teach as what it does sort of like prescribe.
Yeah, and I'm reading something at the moment that's looking at pupil engagement and how parents might help. It's a review copy of a book by Rebecca Winthrop and Jenny Anderson that's going to come out in the autumn. And what I found really interesting is thinking about, we're all familiar with the sort of passenger pupils who are behaviourally compliant, but they're just doing what has to be done to not get noticed and to get through. And over half the kids in this country, in the US, are passengers. You've got achievers who are the A grade pupils who work really hard and they know how to play the system, but there's a fragility in that achievement, because if you're continually successful and haven't experienced failure, you get to a point, you might have got to a great university with your straight A's, and then suddenly you find you don't know how to play the game anymore because you're surrounded by intelligent people asking you much more difficult, curious questions. You have resistors who are just, they're just outside of the zone of proximal development. So they're either bored because they're not being stretched, or they're lost because they've fallen behind with all of that volume of content. What we want are the explorers. What we want are the people who then might not necessarily be getting A's all the time, but there are things about their school day that they're just really excited about because they're exploring the learning, they're exploring the subject, they've got a passion for it, they're applying it, they're doing it in project-based work. It's no surprise that the extended project qualifications are a really good predictor of how well someone's going to do in their degree, because that's about giving some autonomy to the learner, giving some responsibility for them, and allowing them to really pursue their passions. And we need to free up kids to be able to have that, and teachers to be able to teach it.
And then, I guess the third really big issue, which is with us very much, which we haven't talked about yet, artificial intelligence, and that can certainly start to run a coach and horses through what we think should be taught, what students think should be taught. I mean, if they can If they can Google translate every single language on the planet very much, why do they need to learn languages? If the AI can do all the maths computation that they're ever going to need, why should they learn maths? And so on and so on and so on. So AI, you're working with a number of AI companies. What would your best hope be for AI and its impact on education, and what would your worst fear be?
I think my best hope is that it really enhances what is pedagogically possible for teachers. There are some things that it can quickly do on workload, and that will make a big difference to teacher retention. And it can help with formative assessment. It can help with instructional delivery. It can do all of that, and that's fine. But if you go back to that challenge of how do you get more explorers? How do you get maximum engagement of pupils and fewer passengers? The opportunity that AI has to inform the teacher about all of those individuals, help them sort of broker, if you like, the sorts of stimulus material, the ways into the curriculum that's really going to inspire each individual. That's impossible for a human to do on their own. But with the technology, I think it is possible. And then if AI helps us with better flipped learning, so that coming to school is the profoundly human end of learning, where you're doing much more socially, much more with your peers, where you've got the expert learner in the form of the teacher really helping you and guiding you to find your passions and to get to the level of achievement that you want to get to. There's something exciting about that future, but I don't think it is possible without AI as an enhancement to the humans that are core to that process. The fear, however, is that we end up with problems around the data, and that we're giving up lots of learner data to the private sector, who then can use it for other aims. Google promised that all of the data that they know about children through Google Classroom are not going to be used when they become adults to make really profitable advertising that's highly personalized to them, because they've known them since they were children. It's a nice promise, let's hope. But you can see that across the piece. There is a danger that AI gets developed just by big tech private sector companies, and we end up with a backdoor privatization of education, because we become dependent on privately owned AI tools, and they can charge what they like, and they can capture and harvest our data as much as they like and use it for whatever means they need to make as much money out of us as they possibly can.
I really like your vision of the positive future of AI in schools. So what one piece of advice would you offer to school leaders or teachers at the moment to help us move step by step towards that wonderful vision you articulated about how AI could actually, working with human intelligence, could create an even more engaging, powerful learning experience for young people?
I think the advice is to start consciously using the technology and breaking down the distrust and the worry that too many teachers in the workforce have about it. It's got quite a bad rep, AI, but we do all use it all the time. And an A start is just for us to be conscious about, well, in my day so far, how much have I used AI already? Have I used Google Maps? Have I used City Mapper in order to find my way to work, to school? If I have, I've used AI. Have I used an iPhone? If I have, I've used, or any other smartphone. If I have, I will inevitably have used AI in order to do it. I'm using, AI is embedded in the tools that we use as part of the embedded nature of technology in the way that we live. So, okay, let's understand the business models around that and what's happening to the data. And what is AI? It's just really a big old prediction engine. There's nothing too scary about that. And then what tools are just out there that we could use now to change the way we work? There's some great AI for timetabling that could allow us to move to more flexible working, which I know you've talked about in previous podcasts, as part of solving the retention crisis, and to have more family-friendly working for teachers. Because at the moment, they've gone to university with a bunch of people who have gone into different professions, and they're now working 3 days a week in the office and 2 days at home. They're starting families and they're able to work more flexibly. And the teachers are still chained to a timetable that keeps them in school 50 hours a week. It's not sustainable.
We're now going to move into the bottom lining round. So what this means is you'll be pleased to know, because you've had a very tough, long, energy-sapping week. So we're just looking for concise and to-the-point answers, and it can be even one word. I'll let you get away one word if you like. So we've got, I think we've got 5 questions coming up. So here we go, the bottom lining round. Right, question number 1. The biggest leadership lesson that you keep on having to learn is what?
Listen with humility.
Absolutely, because I think that's a lesson I'm having to learn too. A key moment in your leadership journey that made you think or lead differently?
That one's a bit harder. I think probably, there have been several. I think when I was mayor of Frome, we took a big risk in borrowing a load of money and thereby condemning the council taxpayers of Frome to be paying quite a lot of money in loan repayments for a period of time. But what we did was we were able to redevelop the center, a building in the centre of Frome, which actually has transformed that town. And take some risks, be brave.
Be bold, yeah. Absolutely. Again, I think that's, I've been advised that by a number of people on my board over the years, and I think, it's excellent advice. Favourite way to unwind at the end of a busy day or week as a full-time non-executive chair?
Well, I've tried recently to stop gin and tonics being my favourite way to unwind, as I cut down my dependency on alcohol for that purpose. So it's a novel. It's a really good novel. I'm currently reading Corporation Road, which I'm really enjoying. I could talk to you for a long time about some of my favourite books, but get into a great story.
And us men, I think, need to be getting much better at reading novels. Certainly me. Okay. Apparently we can learn a lot from novels.
Yeah.
Okay. And 2 more questions then. Leadership is?
Leadership is bringing the team with you and listening to not just the team, but the people that you serve. Always remember that you're there to serve other people.
It's interesting that in 2 of these responses you mentioned listening, and I've read quite a lot of nonfiction, and the amount of leaders, when they're talking about their sort of leadership journey or their advice, having led for decades, like people like Sir Alex Ferguson, for example, the first chapter of his book is all about listening. So listening is, I completely agree, is absolutely key to successful and effective leadership.
And Tony Blair's just talked a bit about that. He talked about 3 phases of leadership, and one is sort of getting used to it. The other is you go through a phase where you think that you can do everything, and then the final phase, if you've lasted that long, after the sort of hubris, is where you realise that you were right the first time. You don't know everything, and you've got to go out there and listen and work out some of the answers. The
3 stages of leadership. Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, the purpose of education should be
to inclusively realise the best in every single child, not just the majority.
Fantastic. And not to get an outstanding Ofsted grade.
Not. not
Well,
believe
you can get an outstanding Ofsted grade. Well, you could have done, but that's not the purpose of education.
Exactly. It's a bit like qualifications. They are no more than a proxy for what people can do. They're not the be all and end all. The be all and end all is what you can do and the value that you can add for yourself and for others. Qualifications are no more than a proxy, and we have a system that's become much too obsessed by the qualification and not what people are actually doing.
That's right, and I think it's not that qualifications or getting a positive outcome from an accreditation process. It's not that that's not important. I think the phrase that Simon Sinek uses is that in some parts of the Western world we have over-indexed on, if like, those metrics. We've over-indexed on them, and there needs to be a rebalancing. Okay, Jim. So we're going to leave it there because I know you've had a very busy week all over the UK talking about Beyond Ofsted. But I just really want to thank you on behalf of everyone, certainly in education in the UK and around the world. The wonderful work that you do on a system level, and I think this week has been an absolutely amazing example of that. The work that you do to improve the experiences, the life chances, the futures of the young people in our schools, wherever they may be. Thank you very much. It's been great to have you on the show. You've been listening to the Educators Corner podcast, the show that brings you conversations with educators from all over the world, the podcast where we stay curious for just a little bit longer. The Educators Corner podcast is hosted by me, Kai Vasher, and produced by Stuart Pardoe, Zoe Snell and Marion James, and by BSM BSS Productions.